Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. Supergiant Games is a small developer with big ambitions. That's the description they use on their official website, and I couldn't agree more. This studio had some very cool and unique ideas from the very beginning, and they certainly didn't lack the ambition. There is a big chance you never heard about this studio, but it might ring some bells if we mention Hades 1 and Hades 2. Hades 2 came out not so long ago, and just like the first game, it managed to get some great reviews all around. But before Hades, Supergiant Games produced some very niche titles. They managed to create a loyal fan base, and for a good reason. The style of their games is really something special and easily recognizable. Before I started working on this video, I only got to play one of their games, which was Hades back in 2020.
A man after my own heart.
Even so, I never invested serious amount of hours into it back then, so I decided to wait until I get to make this video. Well, it took a while, but I thought now is the perfect time to do it since the latest title Hades 2 dropped not so long ago. I decided to go back and check out all of their games, which are described as action RPGs, at least according to Wikipedia. So sit back, grab some drinks, and let me tell you about my experience with all Supergiant RPGs.
But surely there is more for you to learn beyond this threshold.
The rail must have shook the earth to the bone down in those dens of theirs.
Bastion is a 2011 action RPG which came out on PC and pretty much all mainstream gaming platforms. I was familiar with this game, but I never got to play it for myself. I only remember some of the videos I watched about it back in the day, and that's about it. It always looked interesting to me, but not to the point where I would go out of my way and start playing it myself. After completing it for the first time ever, I can say without a doubt that Bastion is a very unique game. It definitely has some major flaws that I'll point out in this video, but overall I did like it way more than I expected for many different reasons. One of those reasons is the artistic style and especially the presentation, which is very unique. 90% of the levels you're going to play will materialize in front of your eyes, and it gives the game a very special charm. This works in the game's favor, not only in terms of graphics, but also from the gameplay perspective. This unique idea also allowed these developers to be extra creative with the game in general, and you can tell they had a lot of fun while making these levels. Bastion feels like a labor of love, and if we take in consideration that it's the first game from this studio, it's pretty damn good.
We'll all be better off once the Bastion is complete.
The story in Bastion started off really interesting, but it kinda lost me somewhere in the middle. Then it gripped me again at the very end and made me care about what happens. The reason why it lost me in the middle is because Bastion has a very abstract way of telling a story and dialogue. Well, monologue I guess, because there is only one guy speaking. The whole game is being narrated, and this is the only voice you're ever going to hear until the very end.
You had to see if everything Zolf wrote to you was true.
The way the game is narrated is done very well, and even if it happens that you hate narration in games, there is a big chance you're going to like this one. The voice and style of the narrator perfectly fits the vibes of the game.
Sure, the world's all gone to pieces farther than the eye can see. But leave it to this gal to point out the amazing view.
You play as a character that narrator simply refers to as Kid. The catastrophic event called the Calamity has fractured the city of Caledonia, which is the reason why everything floats around in the game. Bastion is the last hope to restore and heal the land, and you need to collect special items called cores as well as shards later on, which have the power to build structures and landmass. You're going to visit various areas in search for these cores, while fighting various enemies and doing some light platforming. There are only a handful of characters you're going to meet, and there is not much to say about them. I won't spoil it for you, but I have to say that the plot twist with one of the characters felt very forced and out of nowhere. That being said, I really like the choice you get at the very end of the game, because it made sense, unlike a lot of the narrated story segments that came before it.
Well, no point explaining what happens next, right?
The narrator in this game reminds me of Matthew McConaughey from True Detective, when he goes off on a tangent about life and whatnot.
The idea of allowing your own crucifixion.
And I felt like Woody Harrelson most of the time while he speaks.
But we're not gonna die. It's more like all of this will just stop.
Just want you to stop saying odd shit.
Mind you, this is just a matter of taste, and you might end up liking the way the story is told a lot more than me. I still don't think it's bad, I just think the story itself is way more important than how you're going to tell that story. And it seems to me that Bastion was focused a bit too much on that second part, instead of creating an interesting story. The gameplay in Bastion offers a great variety of playstyles, especially considering the length of the game. Kid can use 2 weapons at once and 1 special power. You will unlock various new weapons that you can mix and match and create your own unique gameplay experience. I ended up using the musket and the hammer the most, along with the special musket power. I have mixed feelings about the action combat in this game. It can be satisfying for sure and pretty impactful, but it's also very clumsy and imprecise. It always felt like something is missing in the melee combat system, and I just couldn't put my finger on the exact issue. It never reached the point of being very enjoyable for me, that's for sure. Defensive abilities on the other hand are very snappy, and the parry mechanic works perfectly. I love deflecting enemy attacks with a shield, and I also love using ranged weapons in the game. Timing the powerful musket attack feels pretty damn fun. I really wanted to love the melee combat, but it never got better. There are some cool powers for melee weapons like the rear wind for the hammer, but even this ability felt very janky. You can easily fall off the map while using it, which is not a huge deal, but it's still annoying. Moving around in the game feels okay, but not perfect by any means. The control scheme is responsive, everything happens the moment you press the button, which is great. But the level design can sometimes be a bit confusing, mostly because of the 2.5D environments. It's not a huge deal, and the game is not very punishing when you fall off the map, you only get a little bit of damage to your health. The biggest weakness of this combat system is the enemy variety, or the lack of it. It felt to me like I was fighting the same 5 enemy types throughout the whole game. I'm pretty sure there are more than 5, but that's what it felt like most of the time. The lack of boss fights is another thing which hurts this gameplay experience quite a bit, I would say. I mean, technically there are boss fights, but they're just overgrown basic enemies you've been fighting all along, with a small twist. To go back to weapons, it's crazy how many different combinations you can make. I pretty much like all ranged weapons, and some of them are more useful in certain situations. The game does a wonderful job of teaching you how useful these weapons are, and the levels you discover them in are based around the weapon itself, in a way. But you can pretty much use almost all of the weapons against all enemies, and you'll be fine. There are 12 weapons in total, which is a massive amount of weapons for such a short game. I completed the game in about 5 hours, and I actually like the pacing in general. There is some wasted potential here for sure, and the combat feels unfinished in a way considering the amount of options you have when it comes to weapons and abilities. The weapon system never felt like it's fully utilized. And it all circles back to the lack of proper boss fights as well as the lack of unique enemy types in general. The level design is good, and every new area has something interesting to experience. Some of these levels were a bit annoying, but not to the point where I would say they are bad. I expected to see a lot more platforming, but the whole game is very light when it comes to this. Near the end of the game you get the ability to jump, which was weird. I mean, the jumping itself is great, I just wonder why they waited so long to introduce it. It felt like a wasted potential for an even interesting level design. The Bastion itself is like a mini hub area you'll get to visit after every level. Here you can unlock more abilities for your weapons, some special effects that can make the game harder, get some special utility effects, and so on. Besides pushing the story forward with new levels, you can do some challenges for every weapon type in the game and get some rewards. The game has a very decent amount of challenge on the default difficulty. It's nothing crazy, especially considering the challenging nature of their other games, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
What is her problem?
I don't see the point of making enemies stronger and increasing the difficulty in this game. It just makes the combat a lot worse and challenging for all the wrong reasons, especially when it comes to melee combat. We can't forget about the amazing music, which is like 50% of the reason why this game has such a great atmosphere. Supergiant was only figuring out how all of this gaming stuff works back in the day, and combined with the limited budget as well as the limited manpower, it's not surprising that first game had some issues. Despite everything bad I had to say about this game, I still think it was a very enjoyable, short and sweet experience. You could tell this studio is very passionate and creative with their games, so getting to see where they go next must have been very exciting back in the day. Transistor is the second game from Supergiant, and it came out in 2014 on PC, PlayStation 4 and later on Switch. This game is also described as an action role-playing game, but it's not really that simple. I mean, it technically has action RPG elements, but the game is not really meant to be played like that. That's because it has a turn-based system as well. The beginning of this game gives you even less context than Bastion. It begins straight away, where you need to pull out a huge sword out of the man's body that she just killed, I guess. The sword is actually called the Transistor, and he's able to speak to you. By you, I mean the protagonist called Red. Somehow this sword absorbed the consciousness of the man she killed, and this is how the sword is being able to talk to her.
What a night. You're still in one piece. That's all that matters.
She also lost her voice in the process. You start moving through these linear maps in order to escape this place, and you're being attacked by some robots. This is where the game introduces its gameplay mechanics. Moving Red around doesn't feel that good at all, so I was immediately worried about the action gameplay. You get a couple of skills for the sword, which are not that fun to use, at least not while trying to play the game in action modes. Like I said before, you can technically play Transistor as an action game, but you just won't have a lot of fun. Not to mention all the disadvantages you have in combat by even attempting to try and play like this. Shortly after the beginning, the game introduces the turn-based modes. It works very similar to most turn-based strategy RPGs. You can give Red a couple of different commands for movements and skills to use. And with a press of a button, Red will execute all of the commands you gave to her. After that's done, the turn-based mode goes on a cooldown and you won't be able to use it again until the bar regenerates. However, the cooldown is actually very short and you'll be able to use it again very fast. This obviously encourages the player to use it all the time and totally ignore the action part of the gameplay. It's without a doubt the best way to play the game, and you figure this out very fast. That's not bad by default, but why would you even bother including the action mode if it's almost totally useless? I also think this makes Transistor suffer from an identity crisis. If you're not using the turn-based mode, you're putting yourself in a huge disadvantage. And if you even try to use the action mode, you'll have to get used to a very clunky control scheme and not so fun abilities. Even though Bastion had some issues with the action combat, it's much better than this. On the other side, the turn-based combat in Transistor can be fun, but it's nothing outstanding. It will probably be even better if they just decided to commit to this playstyle rather than creating a weird hybrid gameplay, which just ends up being underwhelming. I got bored very fast from playing this game, and I almost didn't like anything about it, to be completely honest. I was dragging myself to continue because I thought maybe I would change my mind later on. If I was just playing this game for myself and not this video, I would probably quit even sooner, to be honest. Anyway, the artistic style of this game is good, but Bastion was way better in my opinion. Even so, Transistor has a recognizable Supergiant art style like pretty much all of their games. Supergiant Studio didn't lack the creativity for this one, not at all. I can see how someone could play this game for the story and vibes, especially if you enjoy the way that Supergiant does storytelling. Transistor still has some very good reviews on Steam and all around the internet. A lot of people like it, that's for sure. I guess it's just not for me, and that's totally fine. I was very excited to try out the next game from Supergiant and see what they're going to do after this. Will they go back to something like Bastion, continue with some ideas from Transistor, or something entirely different? Well, let's find out.
the adversary's flames.
Pyre is described as an action role-playing game, according to Wiki at least. This game came out in 2017 for PC and PlayStation 4. There is nothing that could have prepared me for the gameplay in Pyre, and I say that in the best way possible. The only thing I knew about the game is the part where it's described as a party-based RPG. I don't know about you, but I don't expect to find elements from sports games in an RPG, but why the hell not, I guess. Supergiant basically made up their own unique little gameplay loop, which resembles a game of basketball with RPG progression on top of it. I guess that's the best way to describe it, although comparing it to basketball is a bit of a reach. This game just proves my point that I made while I was talking about Bastion. This studio has some very talented and creative developers. It seems like they always want to make something unique. I can definitely respect that, even if I don't necessarily like all of their games, because these guys seem to be very passionate about gaming. Right, now let me pull out my tongue out of their ass for a second and talk about actual mechanics in this game. First of all, this is the first game from this studio that's not narrated. It's also their first game with huge amounts of dialogue between characters and a greater focus on the story itself. The story itself is a bit convoluted, but that was to be expected if you played previous games from this studio. You play as quote-unquote reader, who is guiding a bunch of exiles to freedom, basically. So, are they prisoners of some kind, or are they in jail for something? I have no freaking idea, okay? But it's your job to guide them through these interesting maps and participate in raids, which is basically like a sports game. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but we'll talk about the gameplay in a minute. Unfortunately, I really didn't like the story that much because I realized I simply don't enjoy this style of writing. I talked about this in the part about Bastion, and it's pretty much the same here.
Just want you to stop saying odd shit.
Actually, I would say it's even worse here, just because of the quantity of dialogue in the game. It totally lost me after a couple of hours, even though I really tried to get invested. On the other hand, I liked most of the characters you meet in the game, and there are parts of the story which I really liked. For example, before every match you'll talk with the enemy team and they usually talk some trash, which I found very entertaining. It makes beating them in a match much more satisfying. As you would expect by now, the game is highly stylized and it looks very unique. I like the look of this game a lot more than Transistor, but I still don't like it as much as Bastion. You have a wagon that you travel with, along with all the party members. The game is very linear in general, and you'll have some wiggle room here and there, but it's mostly on rails. That's nothing unusual for Supergiant Studio, because all of their games we covered so far were pretty linear. However, Pyre kinda tried to give you an illusion of choice in a way, and make you believe that you have some kind of freedom while progressing through the game, which I found a bit annoying and unnecessary. I realized the game would be probably much shorter if not for these quote-unquote traveling segments, but I wish they focused a bit more on the gameplay itself, because it's very freaking good. Speaking of which, you get to control 3 characters in a match and your goal is to destroy the enemy's Pyre. The same can be done to you and you have to stop the enemy from destroying your Pyre. Both Pyres have 100 points and will deal different amounts of damage to it depending on the character you use and some other factors. The goal is to take the shiny orb and place it on the enemy's Pyre. That's about it. I know it sounds simple, but it's much harder than it sounds. I decided to play the game on hard, and I was happy with the difficulty, because it's very satisfying to play these matches. For example, one of your characters is a big demon who moves slowly, but she will do shit ton of damage if you get her to the Pyre. Then you have much smaller characters that are way faster, but they deal less damage. Every match introduces new enemies that fight differently, which makes every match unique. For example, you'll face flying enemies that you have to stop with a jumping attack, very fast but weak enemies, and so on. You get to make a unique roster of 3 characters, and as you progress, all of your characters get new skills. All of them have unique moves, different movement speed and abilities. There is a surprising amount of depth within the gameplay, and you can create some unique tactics for each match. You can pass the orb around, throw it in front of you, and use the terrain to your advantage. The thing is, all of your characters become vulnerable when they take the orb, and the same rule applies to your enemy. By default, all characters have a defensive shield around them, which is smaller or bigger depending on the character itself. When you don't have the orb, you can kill other enemies which are weaker by simply being close to them. The shield disappears whenever you take the orb, which creates a very interesting dynamic. The maps you're playing in will have different environmental effects that you have to worry about. I don't know how this sounds if you never played the game, but I tried my best to explain the mechanics. The bottom line is, I think the gameplay in Pyre is great when it focuses on what it does the best. Everything else in between is not that good or interesting. I just wish they focused more on the matches, or rights as they call them. There is just too much fluff around the main gameplay loop of the game, which I started skipping just to get to the match after a couple of hours. I would really like to see a sequel for this game, especially if they focus more on the gameplay itself. It's a very easy game to recommend actually, especially if you want to try something different and unique.
Oh.
Hades is a roguelike action RPG that came out in 2020 on PC and Switch and a year later on other consoles. Even though Supergiant already had experimented a little bit with roguelike elements in their previous games, they never fully committed to this genre before Hades. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this genre in general, but I like to play some roguelikes every now and then. Especially games that got overwhelming amount of love from people. I remember playing Dead Cells for the same reason as well, and I still love that game. Hades was actually the only game from this studio that I played before I started making this video. However, I never invested a serious amount of hours into this game, I only scratched the surface of it way back in 2020. This was the first game from this studio that managed to break into mainstream. It was still not extremely famous or anything like that, but Hades was way bigger than any previous game from Supergiant, and for a good reason. Hades has an amazing artistic style, which is something we got used to from the studio, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't spend some time talking about it. As a matter of fact, Supergiant games are easily recognizable because of their amazing artistic style. All of these characters are over-designed, but in the best way possible, and it makes sense if you think about it. After all, the majority of characters in the game are literal gods, they are bigger than life. Character portraits are great, but even the 3D characters, which you won't get to look up close that much, are pretty good. There is an amazing attention to detail when it comes to visuals in general, and I don't think I have to spend a lot of time explaining this. The presentation itself is great, from graphics to voice acting and different set pieces in the game. I really enjoyed what Supergiant had to offer here. This game begins like every other Supergiant game, with little to no context or long intros. Even though I had some issues with the storytelling in previous Supergiant games, I always loved how they don't bombard you with unnecessary long intros or lore dumps. Roguelikes are all about the gameplay, and that's certainly the main focus in this game as well, but that doesn't mean these games can't tell a good story. The way that Hades introduces its story and characters goes hand in hand with the roguelike elements of the game. Meaning that each time you die, you'll have some new interactions with these characters and you still push the story forward. I don't know if Hades is the first roguelike that did this, because I don't play a lot of these games. But no matter which game did it first, I think this is an amazing way of telling the story in a roguelike game.
Once in a while, pal, you're gonna see a real fancy bozo try to ruin your good time. You'll know him cause he's glowing like a light, but that's his special armor, see? You gotta punch right through it. He's gonna shrug you off until you do.
It also cushions failed attempts, which you'll have plenty of in these types of games.
It is not necessary to remind me.
It makes you look forward to these interactions, and it feels like the whole game just embraced the roguelike design. But in order to even care about this, the story itself has to be good. The premise of the story in Hades is very simple. You play a son of Hades called Zagreus, and his only goal is to escape from the underworld and reach Mount Olympus. That's about it. The greatest part about this story in general is the characters you're going to interact with, and the non-linear nature of those encounters. The protagonist Zagreus is like an edgy teenager, but still, he's a pretty cool guy and well voice acted.
It was unpleasant, yes.
These gods and all other characters in the game are well done, and they are certainly very memorable. Partly because they are well-known gods from the Greek mythology, but that wouldn't mean a lot if Supergiant didn't do an amazing job with portraying them. They have great voice actors and quite a bit of dialogue, which is delivered in little chunks each time Zagreus gets one of their blessings or back in the underworld when you die while trying to escape.
Do not question my power, Hades. Your son was bound to be discovered the closer he came to the surface.
Supergiant also tried to make things interesting by introducing new characters in the underworld or making some of them disappear and bring them back later. Zagreus will always have different comments about these events, so there's no chance you miss them. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but it's attention to detail and made the whole experience so much better in my opinion. It's not just a mindless roguelike game, it has so much personality and interesting things about it in general. Skelly is my favorite side character in the game.
How am I supposed to keep track of which weapons I've earned these with then?
I don't know, there's always the invention of writing stuff down. You'll figure something out.
Even when you face the same boss fight over and over again, the dialogue won't be the same.
You don't know who or what you're dealing with. Ask Nyx about them for me sometime. Here, I'll give you a chance to ask her very soon.
I can finally say that I really enjoyed the storytelling and the writing in a Supergiant game. I think the storytelling is very well done in Hades, but the sequel took this to another level.
Another failed attempt. About ready to give in?
Let's not get ahead of ourselves though and start talking about the gameplay in Hades. Right off the bat, you get the feel of the control scheme and experience the action combat system in Hades. Controlling Zagreus is a very smooth experience and it's a night and day difference compared to all previous games from this studio. The controls are tight, everything happens instantly and the combat becomes very fast paced after a while. In order to even attempt to have a combat system like that, the control scheme in your game has to be on point, and luckily that's certainly the case in Hades. However, only after playing the sequel, I noticed how much smoother it feels compared to the first game. This doesn't mean Hades 1 feels bad to play, not at all, but the sequel feels even smoother. Hades has a little bit of stiffness every now and then, but it's almost not even worth mentioning, to be honest. I think that's because some of these attacks have a bit longer animation lag, which you can't cancel, and that can be a death sentence in a very fast-paced action game. Again, nothing to freak out about, and you probably won't even notice this until you try out the sequel, and maybe not even then.
It was unpleasant, yes.
Anyway, you start the game by using a big sword, which is just music to my ears. But as you progress through the game and get enough special keys, you unlock a couple of more weapons that you can use. To my surprise, I ended up playing the game a lot with the bow, although I did use the sword a lot as well. But I had the most success with the ranged bow gameplay, and I really like the strong attack that you have to time properly. I think the best way to play these games is to keep it very simple in terms of how many attacks you're using. The action gets faster and faster, so you don't want to complicate your life with trying to use everything that's at your disposal all the time. Especially when you're fighting regular enemies in great quantity. I mean, it's not like you have a ton of different attacks in the game, but sticking to 1 or 2 attacks works the best for me. This also heavily depends on the RNG of your build and which attack ends up being your strongest. So naturally, you'll want to focus on the strongest attack. No matter which build you get to play, one thing is for sure, you'll have to use the dodge button a lot in this game. Dodging out of the way feels very smooth, and it's pretty fair, I would say. There's a shit ton of stuff to dodge in this game, up to the point where Hades comes very close to being a bullet hell game. But in the best way possible, I would say, because these fights are very enjoyable in Hades. I love how you can deflect most attacks with your own attacks, but only if you get a special skill from a god. Although that skill seems to pop up on regular basis. Keeping yourself alive is the most important thing in the game, so learning how to dodge properly and not getting hit is very important. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock various things which can help you with this, like having an extra life when you die, or getting to refill your HP with items that you can buy, and so on. There is a little progression system with permanent upgrades. You need to collect enough resources in order to unlock upgrades at the mirror back in your room, and these upgrades remain permanent. I think Hades does a great job with the progression system in general. You feel weak as shit in the beginning, and these boss fights can feel impossible when you get to face them for the first couple of times. Then you start unlocking all of these little things which improve your character, and it gets much easier. And of course, you gain more experience by just fighting these bosses over and over again, so you know exactly what to expect from these fights. The thing is, these bosses are not extremely hard or anything, but they are very well designed. They have more than enough unique attacks that you have to worry about. However, the biggest challenge is to remain calm before you get to the next boss fight and try to save your health and utility. You can easily get very nervous in these fights because you know you have to start from the beginning again if you fail. You'll get to a point where you just blast through the couple of first boss fights after a while, which feels very good considering you struggled so much in the beginning. That being said, I think Hades can feel very beginner unfriendly. You can easily get demoralized by losing a boss fight over and over again just to fight through waves of enemies and get to the same boss. People who love this genre probably won't have any issues with that, but beginners probably will. I was not a beginner and I still felt very demoralized each time I got killed in a boss fight, up to the point where I didn't want to play the game until tomorrow or something. But if the game is good, you will be back and try to defeat those bosses again and do a full run eventually. I think there is nothing fundamentally wrong with that, because not every game is supposed to keep you playing for extremely long play sessions. As a matter of fact, a full run in Hades and most roguelike games can take you around 30 to 40 minutes, usually. But in order to get to that point, you'll need to invest some serious hours in the game. These games are not very long in general, but only when you start mastering the gameplay. The process can be frustrating, but it's the part of the gameplay loop and you either enjoy it or not. To put it like this, even if you end up hating this game at first, there is a big chance you're going to change your mind when you get to the point where the game becomes much easier for you. When I struggled in the beginning and got killed so many times in these boss fights, I was wondering why we can't just continue the game from the boss that just killed us. But that would just ruin the entire concept of the game, and considering there are only a handful of bosses in general, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Hades offers you a great variety of different builds, but that's almost entirely based around RNG side of the game. As you would expect in a roguelike, you get upgrades randomly, but you can still choose between 3 different options and try to build the synergy between skills. All gods have different category of skills that you can choose, and it's up to you to mix and match those skills in order to create a very effective build. This also depends on the weapon you're using and their unique moves. RNG skills from the gods can completely alter your special weapon moves and give you some very cool effects. As you would expect, the game is very replayable, and you can find alternative versions of bosses as well as some hidden fights. However, the sequel will take this concept to another level.
You keep telling yourself that, boy.
You'll soon feel better, Cerberus, I swear.
Hades 2 came out in the middle of my playthrough of the first game, so I was really struggling not to rush through Hades 1, to be honest. I really wanted to start playing the sequel, especially because people were so positive about it. I was a bit skeptical about the quality of this game, not because I expected it to be bad or something. I just had a hard time believing that it could be so much better than the first game, which was already amazing. Well, after playing it a lot more hours than Hades 1, I can say without a doubt that the sequel is a much better game.
Quit teasing me and help me look.
Hades 2 is essentially identical to the first game in a lot of ways, so I'll try my best not to repeat myself here. However, the sequel introduces some new features and mechanics, and it also drastically improves a lot of existing features from the first game. The sequel has the same artistic style, with some improvements here and there. For example, the character portraits are even more detailed now, with some slightly animated parts. 3D character models look a bit better and more detailed as well, and the same can be said about the environments. Speaking of which, some of these levels are much bigger or wider compared to the levels in the first game. That's not better by default, but it was a great way to break the monotony of smaller and more condensed levels that we got used to. Still though, the sequel doesn't lack small or even very small levels. The thing I forgot to mention while talking about the first game is the visual clarity. No matter how chaotic things got in both of these games, I never had any issues to see what's going on the screen, except in some very rare cases. Putting that aside, the story of Hades 2 is a little bit different of course, but the premise remains very simple. Instead of escaping Hades' underworld, your goal is to kill Kronos. Kronos has escaped from his prison in the depths of Tartarus, and he took the control of the underworld, imprisoning Hades and other characters from the House of Hades, including our boy Zagreus, the previous protagonist of Hades. This time around, you play the game as a princess of the underworld called Melanoi. She's actually a sister to Zagreus, which is pretty cool. I think her design is also pretty cool, and she's a decent character in general. Hades 2 improved the storytelling and characters in almost every single way. There's so much more stuff happening around you, and it feels much deeper compared to the story from the first game. These characters are always up to something, especially Nemesis. Hades 1 would do a similar thing when characters disappear and show up later in the game, but Hades 2 does a much better job with this. For example, Nemesis will pop up every now and then while you're trying to progress through these levels. She can give you a challenge that you have to do or just comment on the current situation. But not only Nemesis, you'll meet other characters as well, and they don't only sit in the base doing nothing all day. This gives a greater depth to the story and characters, which makes them pretty memorable. It also breaks the monotony of these runs a little bit, although that's never a problem in this game to begin with. There are some pretty cool new characters you're going to meet in Hades 2, and once again, most of them are gods. Skelly is back as well, and he also got promoted. There is a lot of unique dialogue in the game, which only triggers in certain situations. Like depending on how many times you died, which upgrades you got, the location, and probably a lot more factors. The non-linear storytelling of this game is really cool and makes the game so dynamic.
You've suffered injuries, Melanoi. You know that I can cure them for you, and you know that I shall not.
It also makes you feel like everything in the game is player-driven, and all of your actions affect the game, in a way. They managed to make all of this feel so seamless. Now let's talk about the gameplay. While Zagreus was mostly focused on the melee combat in the first game, considering that most weapons he used were in melee range, Melanoi is mostly focused on ranged weapons. She has a couple of melee weapons that you can use, but I always felt like I'm in a disadvantage when I'm using them. They are not bad, and I use the dual blades a lot actually, but I always went back to the default weapon, which is the staff. Using this weapon feels almost perfect, especially if you get some cool RNG with the boons. Hades 2 offers you a bit more variety when it comes to attacks with all the weapons that you can use. There are 6 different weapons that you can unlock, and it won't take you long until you do. I think all of these weapons are pretty unique and they can drastically change your playstyle, but I still think the default staff is the best. It's also worth pointing out that the control scheme in Hades 2 feels smoother. I touched upon this in my previous section about the first game. Hades 2 has a shorter animation lock for most attacks, and moving around in this game just feels better in general. The animations are pretty good as well, which obviously helps with this. The animations were pretty good in Hades 1 as well, but they are even better in Hades 2. Regardless of your weapon choice, you have a dodge like before that you're going to use a lot, a spell that slows down enemies, and now you can also sprint. This is a massive deal actually, and it's very useful against certain bosses and enemies. It's also upgradable with the boons, which makes it even better. I didn't expect to use sprint a lot because it seemed obsolete to me, because you would usually just dodge. I was wrong though, because I ended up using it a lot. One of the biggest changes in the combat system is the inclusion of a mana bar. Special attacks with all weapon types will drain Melanoi's mana now. A lot of the boons you get from the gods can alter your mana usage in various ways. You can even turn your mana off with some of these upgrades in order to get some cool effects. But this also means that you won't be able to use some special moves with your weapons. And this is only one of the examples how varied your build can be in this game and how many options you get to play around with the combat system. There is a lot of build variety in the game with different boons, as well as a brand new progression system with the cards. You have a limited amount of cards that you can equip, which give you different effects. You can increase the number of cards that you can equip by using a certain item you can buy, which substantially increases the strength of your character. You will unlock another cool system later on, which allows you to mess with some specific mechanics and progression. Speaking of progression, Hades 2 doesn't only have one straight path through the game like Hades 1. Instead, you will have to clear the underworld and the surface level, which have two completely different paths and bosses. The surface level unlocks shortly after you begin the game, but you'll need to do something specific before you can start clearing it. Hades 2 included a simple crafting and gathering system, which are pretty much essential for some things, and this can also affect your runs in various ways. The boss fights in Hades 2 are great. And they somehow managed to bring the same desperate feeling like the first time I fought the bosses in Hades 1. The first couple of times I tried to fight the Sirens, for example, which is like the second boss fight in the game, it felt almost impossible. But I knew that won't be the case for long, and I was right, of course. You start getting more powerful and more accustomed to their moves and your weapon type. I think all of these boss fights are well designed, no complaints whatsoever. I love how you get to fight Cerberus from the first game. That fight was pretty damn cool, and we can say the same for pretty much all of these fights. I won't spoil anything, but Hades 2 also pays respect to the first game in a couple of different ways, which I found very cool. It also has alternative versions of these boss fights, but it also has more boss fights in general. The number of boss fights compared to the first game is at least doubled. So yeah, Supergiant basically took everything that was good about the first game and just improved it in a couple of ways.
Another failed attempt. About ready to give in?
They didn't try to turn the sequel into something completely different, and I think that was a smart move. This is also the first sequel for a game they ever did, and they wanted to play it safe, but they included just enough new stuff to keep the game feeling fresh. To put it simply, Hades 2 is nothing that we haven't seen before, but it does everything so well, and it's a huge improvement compared to the first game. I can't recommend it enough, and I'm glad that Supergiant was very successful with the sequel. After all of those years of experimenting with their games, they finally struck gold with the series.
Now for what's mine.
This has been a very fun video to work on, because I enjoyed most of these games I covered, and it's something a bit different compared to what I usually cover.
It is not necessary to remind me.
Supergiant games came a long way since Bastion, and it will be very interesting to see what they're going to do next. Will they try to make a much higher budget game, or just continue doing what they did for the last couple of titles? Anyway, tell me your opinion about Supergiant games in the comments below, and which one was your favorite, if any. I'll have some GOG affiliate links for some of these games, so if you want to buy them on GOG, feel free to use my links. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. And if you want to go a step further, consider supporting your boy by becoming a YouTube channel member or a Patreon. Huge thanks to all my current supporters, and I'll see ya in the next one.